In the studio now, TalkTV's political correspondent Alicia Fitzgerald, good to see you, and former advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley. And down the line is Linsay Taylor from MEND. MEND was among the list of organisations to be investigated. So I think we might start with you, Linsay. First of all, tell us, if you wouldn't mind, what is MEND? What do the letters stand for? And what, as far as you're concerned, does MEND stand for?
MEND stands for Muslim Engagement and Development. It's an organisation that works across the whole of the UK to tackle Islamophobia. And we do that through engaging with the Muslim community, but also engaging with civil society and wider society to deliver training, panel discussions and conversations around supporting the Muslim community and to tackle the issue of Islamophobia.
And this new definition, do you find it to be a sensible, a clear and a compelling description of what constitutes extremism, or do you feel that it's wrong somewhere?
I feel that bringing in a new definition of extremism at this time in what is a general election year is very worrying. I also find that bringing it in without having had parliamentary debate or wider civic society engagement in really having a conversation around what this is really worrying. Also, the fact that obviously 3 former Home Secretaries have come out saying that they are concerned about the politicisation of this definition and of bringing about a new definition at this time is highly concerning.
Except when you read the definition, and it is the promotion or advancement of violence, hatred or intolerance, I think lots of people will think, well, absolutely, that defines extremism very well, very clearly, very briefly, in a way that anyone and everyone can understand, and that it's quite clear that any organisation at all that fosters or nurtures or promotes or encourages or indeed uses violence, hatred or intolerance or the advancement of the same should be disbanded or looked carefully at or examined, and people should cut ties with it if it's found to do any of those things, shouldn't they?
I think at the end of the day, having a strong, robust definition on extremism is very important. But the way that it's been brought about and the fact that it's being used to target mainstream organisations is really concerning.
And isn't your use of the word target interesting and possibly concerning? Because is it targeting organisations, or is it simply focusing on organisations to have a look, examine what's going on, and make absolutely certain that none of these things that have been included in the description of extremism are going on? And if they're not, then these organisations won't be targeted. They'll carry on as before, won't they?
I think it would be great if we understood what lay behind the definition, what lay behind the organisations who have been named within the list that Mr. Gove brought out. So why these specific organisations? Why is it that he wants to look further into organisations that are mainstream within British society and that are doing a job, 90% of them, to tackle hate and eradicate hate and to bring society together? I think it would be really important to know and understand why certain organisations had been placed on this list,
in case they might be found to covertly encourage or foster or nurture exactly what he doesn't want, which, as we all know now, is the promotion or advancement of violence, hatred or intolerance. And if they're not, they won't be found to be doing so. I mean, you know, there are organisations at the absolute core and heart of our society, for example, the police force, which have been found to be riddled with all kinds of appalling bigotry and racism and misogyny and all the sorts of things that we absolutely most don't want to find featuring there. And it's a similar kind of thing, isn't it, to look into organisations that may have been considered mainstream, just in case.
I mean, I do think it's important to look into organisations, but it would be interesting to know how this decision had come about, why these specific organisations had been named, and also the fact that there has been a lot of Islamophobia within our own government over the last number of years. I mean, obviously, we've had Lee Anderson coming out recently with his comments about the London mayor. We've also had previous First Minister or Prime Minister, making comments about Muslim women wearing niqab looking like letterboxes. This is already a very marginalised community, a community who've seen a 365% rise in hate crime. since, you know, over the last couple of months. And really, this is only going to marginalise communities further.
Unless, of course, the examination shows nothing whatsoever to concern anybody, worry anybody, and each one of the organisations is duly told this is fine, you're flawless and faultless, please carry on. In which case there'll be no reason to feel marginalised or anything else, will there?
I would absolutely presume that all of the organisations would if they had to go through this, but it would be nice for the government to reach out and have a conversation with these organisations, that they don't hear about the fact that they could be named in a government document or a government release about extremism through media leaks, which is a real concern as well, and really actually have a robust conversation with these organisations and actually see what this all means would be very beneficial to us all.
Linsay, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Alicia. Can you fill us in on why Michael Gove is doing this and what his brief actually is? Isn't he meant to be levelling up? Why is he suddenly doing this?
That's a really good point, actually. Charlie might have more insight on that, because I actually hadn't really...
Why is it Michael Gove?
I guess it's communities as well, so I guess he's also in charge of, like, social cohesion and things like that as well, so I imagine he probably was just the best equipped for that to fall under his brief, because this is something that doesn't often crop up in government. I mean, this is a new definition. This isn't something that they've necessarily had to pinpoint in the way that they've had to recently. But I think it's really important to go back about what this actually is about. And this is about organisations who would maybe contribute money or like additional funding and putting that into government. And obviously we're talking about these marches as well, because I think that has been a bit of a catalyst for this, but this isn't in direct response to the marches. This isn't to say that, you know, people on the pro-Palestine marches or on the far-right marches, we're targeting you. This isn't about that. That probably prompted this. But this is about organisations that could kind of lobby government, could be giving funds to government in any way, and they're just trying to clamp down on how they get their money, I guess.
And what do you think of the definition that Michael Gove has given?
I mean, I think it was pretty good, to be honest. I think, you know, he was pretty fair in the way that he went about it, and his explanation I thought was really quite fair as well. I think there's a range of organisations there. I mean, as you've said, he wasn't saying that all 5 of these organisations definitely have done something wrong and definitely will be banned. It just was an example of a few that he will be looking into and the government will be looking into, just to make sure that this hadn't happened, that no guidelines had been breached under the new definition. But I think it was more just to show the kind of scope and the areas in which that the government will be focusing on henceforth, and that was 3 Islamist groups and 2 groups that he categorised as neo-Nazi groups.
And you often build on this programme as former advisor to Michael Gove. Michael Gove is a cerebral man. He's a highly intellectual man. He's a man that wouldn't enter into something as important as defining extremism lightly, is he? He's somebody with the intellectual capacity to really wrestle with something like this and think very carefully about what each word he uses means, and choose it with purpose and with some kind of discernment, isn't he?
You're absolutely right. And when I was a special advisor, I had the title, but I neither felt special or gave any kind of advice, because it was Michael Gove. You know, he's brilliant. He knows what he's talking about. And I think it kind of harks back to when he was Education Secretary, funny enough. So he would have known back in that role that there were universities and schools where there was not that community cohesion, where you had not people praying and having a religious faith of Islam, but there was Islamists and Islamism taking place in certain communities that was impacting on schools, that wasn't increasing diversity, it was becoming more divisive in the schooling sector. And I think that's where the PREVENT strategy, that was a joint initiative with the Department for Education, with the Home Office at the time. Theresa May was the Home Secretary when Michael Gove was the Education Secretary, and the Department for Communities, as it was back then. They all came together to draft up a PREVENT, to prevent, as it says on the tin, extremism entering in our civil society. And this is just a building, I think, block on top of that to make sure that where there is extremism, whether it's on the far right or whether it is Islamic extremism and fundamentalism, then that is called out, where there are organisations that are effectively bullying councillors, or where people have a stake, as you were saying, have a stake in government, have a stake in society. They have no place for where they are.
And yet you hear our guest Linsay of Men saying, why have we been targeted in this way? She's the word targeted. Why have these particular organisations, which are mainstream organisations, been targeted? I want to know, she says, how come we've been chosen? What was the reasoning behind it? Where was the conversation? And quite a lot of backstory she wanted to have, rather than simply saying what she might have said. If there's any extremism in this organisation, we'd be most delighted to have it winkled out and eradicated urgently. But that's not it. There's quite a lot of annoyance and lots of irritation and people feeling victimised and all sorts of other things and incredulous. They just can't believe it. They don't know why their particular organisation. Is there a possibility, Alicia, that this might make trouble, that people will be annoyed and angry and disgruntled and all that kind of thing?
I think we're at a really difficult time at the moment in society, and there's a lot of tension between people with certain religious beliefs or with certain ideological beliefs and the government at the moment. Lots of people feel like the government maybe are ganging up on them, or that they're trying to, you know, silence voices from one side of an argument. So I think the tensions are a lot higher than they potentially normally would be. And I think that definitely feeds into why people like Linsay would be feeling like that. And I think I've even seen lots of other people come forward today and express similar sentiment, of just kind of said, you know, what is this about? Are you trying to silence us? Are we not allowed to have a view just because it's not your view? And I think that's something that they're trying to grapple with at the moment. But I'm sure in coming weeks we'll probably have a bit more of an understanding about what the logic was behind those 5 organisations that Gove mentioned today. He didn't explain what the, you know, rhyme or reason was specifically, but we do know what kind of side of the argument all of these organisations do fall on. We just don't know why specifically it was them, and potentially we might hear a bit more in the coming weeks.
Yes, and talk to me about free speech and the precious and valuable nature of it, and where somebody else's right to express their ideas stops.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, we've seen over the course of the weekend, well, every weekend in London, we're seeing these mass protests, but we are seeing where the majority of people are protesting peacefully, you do see extremist language being used. You do see hate speech on the streets of London, where the police have frankly felt unable to, or not willing, to intervene and round up those people because it is inciting hate.
I mean, we did have a Daily Telegraph front page headline this week saying, you know, Jewish people feel that London is a no-go zone at weekends because of the protest marches, and that's an untenable situation in a democracy, in a free country, where people feel they can't actually go into the centre of their own city because they're not quite sure what might happen. They feel it's dangerous. They feel it's an obstacle course. They feel they're kind of running the gauntlet of real mass hatred. I wonder what. In fact, I heard who did I hear today talking about? Oh yes, life in the 70s, and talking about you know, being chased down Victoria Station by the National Front, and how absolutely terrifying it was. I mean, violent attack and being pursued by a mob because you were, in her case, her family were originally from Pakistan, and she was talking about that. And you know, that's the possibility for a Jewish family that goes into London at weekends when one of these protest marches is going on. So it's not a happy situation for anybody at the moment, is it?
Not at all. And that's why I think where you have organisations that may be purporting some of that, or encouraging it, or certainly not stopping it, who are, say, lobbying councillors or councillors who are being targeted for whatever reason, then, you know, you have to stamp it out. But I think it's just giving the government a bit more weight now to you know, take on these people who think that it's free speech, but it's actually hate speech, and to call them out for what they're doing.
Let's talk a little bit about Diane Abbott in the House of Commons, and the fact that she's now written about it, hasn't she, in The Guardian today, and the fact that she tried to get the attention of the Speaker, not once, but 40 times.
Yeah, this was yesterday at Prime Minister's Questions, and Diane Abbott basically, she kept standing up, and that's what you do in Prime Minister's Questions. If you want the chance to speak and you want the chance to have your question, you've got to kind of bob up with authority and hope that the Speaker chooses you. And obviously, pretty much the whole of Prime Minister's Questions was centred around this debate with Diane Abbott and those comments made about her, and her name was being mentioned a lot. I mean, pretty much the whole thing was about her, yet she was denied the chance to actually say anything during the whole half hour of Prime Minister's Questions. And in her letter today, which she published a kind of statement about it, she said that she tried to speak 40 times during that. We haven't actually heard much from Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons. Lots of theories and, you know, potential ideas about why he didn't select to do it, but still lots of people really looking to him and both of the leaders, Sir Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, for an answer about why that didn't happen.
And Charlie, I mean, the sort of aftermath of his not having asked her, what do you think?
Well, the irony is, obviously, a couple of weeks ago, the Speaker broke convention by trying to allow all parties to have a say during an Palestine debate, and that caused uproar and the both main parties walking out the chamber, just up in arms because he broke convention.
Yes.
This time out, he's stuck rigidly, it seems to me, to convention where MPs have put in to ask a question. There's been a certain number that have been drawn out.
We know
Diane
that's
wasn't
a
part of
convention
it.
that's often dispensed with. You often do take questions. Apparently, Theresa May's
exactly.
a big one for bobbing up and down, and they often, just because she's a former Prime Minister, excellent reason, they give her a chance to speak. And given that this debate was all about what happened to Diane Abbott and what had been said about it, you would have thought that overlooking her was a rather extreme thing to do.
Exactly. I think, he probably, in hindsight now, is pinching himself to say, or kicking himself to say, I should have called her and let her have her say in the Commons, because it is an issue that has dominated.
And also, it would have been interesting to hear from her, and also thrown a great deal of light on the subject. It wasn't just that she was going to give some kind of vague commentary. She would be the person who knew exactly how it felt and why it was dangerous and what the problem was.
Well, she has to ask a question as well. That's the key thing. So it wouldn't have been a case of her just standing up and saying, I feel really sad or really offended. It wouldn't be that. You have to ask a question. You have to direct a question to the Prime Minister.
Yes.
So I'm sure she would have had something, pretty reasonable to say, given that the whole stretch of Prime Minister's questions was about her.
I know.
Yes. And I mean, absolutely, she would have to ask a question. I mean, she might not have liked the answer because obviously I'm sure the Prime Minister would have reminded her, however terrible the comments that have been made about her
Of her own comments.
Exactly. She's had the Labour Party withdrawn for her because of her own comments on anti-Semitism.
quite.
So language matters.